Long before shared universes became Hollywood's biggest obsession, one film quietly attempted something studios would spend the next 2 decades trying to perfect. It pulled together the most iconic monsters in cinema history, asked audiences to accept a world where ancient evil and explosive action lived side by side, and did it all with a passion that no boardroom strategy could have manufactured. What powered this movie wasn't a calculated franchise formula. It was something far more personal. It started with a child and a television screen. Stephen Sommers grew up completely captivated by the classic monster movies that defined early Hollywood. He absorbed every frame: Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and those images never left him. They planted something that spent decades quietly growing into a vision of bringing all of them together in a single massive adventure. The film that eventually emerged wasn't born from market research. It was born from a child's imagination that simply refused to grow up, and that sincerity is embedded in every frame. The opening of the film is one of the most confident creative choices any blockbuster of its era attempted. While other productions raced immediately into color and chaos, this one pulled the audience backward through time, presenting its prologue in black and white, deliberately styled to mirror the look and pacing of 1930s horror cinema. Every shadow fell exactly where it would have in a film made 70 years earlier. It wasn't a gimmick. It was a declaration that everything that followed was built on genuine love for where these creatures originally came from. When color flooded in and the pace shifted, the contrast was purposeful. The audience had already been anchored in classic horror tradition, which made the modern spectacle feel earned rather than hollow. The physical production was extraordinary in ways audiences rarely appreciate. At a moment when digital environments were rapidly replacing practical construction, the filmmakers actually built the exterior structures of Dracula's castle. Massive, towering physical constructions that actors could walk through, touch, and genuinely react to. There is a fundamental difference between a performer standing beneath a real stone archway and one staring at a green screen imagining the same space. The environment pushed instincts in ways no digital backdrop could replicate, and the blend of physical architecture and digital extension gave the film a sense of scale that still holds up today. Hugh Jackman earned the lead role not purely on talent, but on personality. The director needed someone who could survive an extraordinarily demanding shoot without creating friction on set. Long hours, complex effects work, extreme physical conditions, all of it had to be absorbed by a lead who brought energy rather than exhaustion to every day. Jackman's professionalism, his warmth, his genuine enthusiasm stood out immediately. The role was eventually shaped around those natural qualities, leaning into the charm and lightness he brought rather than forcing him into the brooding archetype the character could have easily become. The werewolf transformation sequences were designed around one very specific ambition: they had to look agonizing. Not supernatural. Not elegant. Painful. The concept centered on skin visibly tearing away to reveal the creature underneath, making every second feel brutal and visceral. Achieving that vision required careful coordination between practical effects and digital animation, with neither approach capable of delivering the result alone. Physical elements grounded the sequence in texture and weight, while digital tools provided the fluid impossible motion that made it feel genuinely alive. The result remains one of the most memorable werewolf sequences in modern cinema because it committed fully to physicality over beauty. One of the most fascinating stories from the production involves a monster that never made it to screen. The creature from the Black Lagoon was originally planned to appear alongside the film's other legendary monsters. Concept artwork was developed. Physical models were created. The character was seriously considered before the decision came down to remove it entirely. The creative team concluded that adding another iconic monster would stretch the narrative too thin and pull focus away from the central conflict. The surviving artwork suggests a version of the creature that would have fit the film's visual world remarkably well, and fans have quietly debated whether its removal helped or hurt ever since. The film's relationship with commercial success is one of the more instructive case studies in how Hollywood measures outcomes. The worldwide box office was strong by most standards, but with an enormous budget and even larger franchise expectations behind it, the profit margin fell short of Universal's projections. The studio had positioned this as the beginning of something much larger, a franchise engine capable of generating sequels and spin-offs for years. When the returns didn't reach that threshold, continuation plans were quietly shelved. The film became a textbook example of a Hollywood paradox, entertaining a massive audience and still being classified as a disappointment because it failed to satisfy corporate mathematics rather than human ones. Kate Beckinsale was brought into the production without a traditional addition. The director had a specific vision of who belonged opposite Jackman and wasn't interested in alternatives, even when studio executives pushed back. Summers needed someone who could match Jackman's physical presence and emotional range without being overshadowed by the spectacle surrounding every scene. That insistence paid off visibly on screen. The chemistry between the two leads gave the film an emotional center that kept the monster spectacle from ever feeling hollow, and without that human relationship anchoring the chaos, the story risked becoming nothing more than a sequence of effects showcases. Bringing Frankenstein's monster to life required something digital technology simply couldn't provide on its own. The daily transformation of the actor into the creature stretched to roughly 7 hours in the makeup chair before he ever stepped in front of a camera. Layer by layer, prosthetics and textures and carefully applied paint built the creature's appearance from nothing. Every session had to precisely match the one before it to maintain continuity across shooting days. The actor endured this ritual day after day, arriving long before the rest of the cast and sitting essentially motionless while his face and body were gradually buried beneath the character's elaborate exterior. That practical craftsmanship gave the monster a physical weight and presence that pure digital construction would have struggled to replicate. On screen, the creature occupied real space, cast real shadows, and interacted with real environments. The choice to film in Prague during winter was driven entirely by atmosphere. The team wanted overcast skies, heavy natural light, and an environment that organically looked like it belonged inside a gothic horror story. The Czech capital delivered all of that and more, along with brutal temperatures and limited daylight hours that tested everyone involved. Despite the difficulty, the weather became one of the film's most valuable unintentional assets. The gray skies, the visible cold breath, the heavy atmospheric texture on screen, none of it was manufactured. It was real. That authenticity gave the film a visual quality a controlled soundstage could never have replicated, turning a logistical challenge into one of the production's defining qualities. On most productions this size, exhausting days are simply accepted as part of the deal. Something quite different happened here. The director called a wrap at the same time every single day. Stephen Sommers believed fundamentally that a rested crew would consistently produce better work than an exhausted one grinding through overtime. Cast members later described how that consistency elevated morale throughout the shoot, keeping energy noticeably higher than what they had experienced on comparable productions. It was a leadership philosophy that prioritized quality over the appearance of commitment, and it showed in the finished film. Before production ever began, the creative team was given an unusual assignment. They were encouraged to immerse themselves in the original Universal monster films that had inspired the entire project, not as optional enthusiasm but as genuine research. The influence showed up in countless details throughout the finished film. Set designs carried deliberate echoes of earlier cinema. Lighting choices referenced specific shots from decades-old productions. These weren't accidental similarities. They were intentional callbacks woven in by people who had done the work to understand what they were honoring. The result is a film that operates on two levels simultaneously, a fast-paced monster adventure on the surface, and a layered homage hiding just beneath it for those willing to look. Looking back at everything this production attempted, what stands out most is how far ahead of its time the entire concept was. The crossover ambition, the franchise infrastructure, the shared monster universe, all of it anticipated a model that the industry would spend the following decade scrambling to perfect. When the sequel plans collapsed, that unrealized vision became one of the most fascinating what-ifs in modern blockbuster history. Universal would eventually return to the shared monster universe concept years later, with similar struggles. The pattern suggests that connecting these legendary characters into a cohesive, sustainable franchise remains one of Hollywood's most persistently elusive goals. The film's legacy isn't failure. It's being early. It attempted something the industry wasn't quite ready for, and for the fans who recognized from the very beginning what it was trying to build, that forward-thinking vision is exactly what transformed a box office disappointment into something far more enduring. Van Helsing was never a safe bet. It asked for a leap of imagination, and it made that ask with the confidence of someone who had been dreaming about it since childhood, standing in front of a small television screen, watching black and white monsters, already imagining what it would look like if they all shared the same world.